There are some who want to turn the page on what has happened to black people and not talk about it because it makes some feel uncomfortable. I'm not one of those people. I believe that the stories of injustice that black people have endured must be told. The memories of those who have lived and died in bondage and brutality and injustice must be honored. Because to truly understand present-day injustice and marginalization of black communities, you have to look back. Only then can you truly appreciate and understand that present-day struggles are linked to past harms. You don't just get over this kind of injustice in a few decades. In this video, I want to talk about two black men who suffered during a time period when black was a reason to accuse, convict, and execute you without asking a single question. Before I get into the story, I have to provide some background. To understand this story I'm going to talk about, I need to first tell you about lynchings and racial violence in Mississippi, and in particular, in Kemper County. So give me a few moments to talk about this, and then I'll get into what happened to these two black men. When it comes to lynching, Mississippi holds a unique position. From 1881 to 1940, Mississippi had 575 lynchings. That's more lynchings than any other state. Mississippi's tragic history of lynching was tied to the large population of black people in some areas and the exploitative economy after the Civil War. This system created deep tensions between black workers and white landlords and employers. As black people saw better opportunities, their goals often clashed with that of the whites and created hostility. In some parts of Mississippi, white people lived in constant fear of black resistance or violence, and this fear spread, making lynching more frequent and deadly in Mississippi. Even though all of Mississippi was bad when it came to race relations, no place was worse than Kemper County. This rural area was known as Bloody Kemper, and it had the highest per capita rate of lynchings in the entire state. It was a black belt county in Mississippi, and it was not a good place to be if you were black. Racism was everywhere. Practically no black person voted in these areas, and white schools received as much as 40 times more than black schools. And Kemper had a history of violence against black people. In 1888, a fight broke out between black and white youths. A group of whites pursued the black youth to the black section of the city of Wahala, but they were met by black men who banded together to protect the black community. In the exchange of fire, several black people lost their lives and at least two whites died. Violence struck Wahala again in the year 1906. In December of that year, black passengers on a train got into a disagreement with a white train conductor. This resulted in two black people losing their lives and a third being injured and later lynched. Whites in the area rioted in Wahala and Scuba. Whites even terrorized a prominent black family that had nothing to do with the incident. A mob came into Calvin Nicholson's home. He was the wealthiest black man in that area. They lynched him and burned his body and his house. At least 12 black people lost their lives. The governor had to call in troops just to restore order and peace. And it wasn't just mobs that attacked black people. The law also joined and participated in inflicting injustice on black people, especially in Kemper County. In 1934, three black men, Arthur Ellington, Henry Shields, and Ed Brown, they were tortured and beaten by a mob and then the police after being falsely accused of taking the life of a white man. The men were beaten until they falsely confessed to this crime. Their convictions were later overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, with the court saying that what happened to these men was something out of the medieval times. I covered that story more fully in another video, so check it out if you haven't seen it. But in this video, I want to talk about another story of injustice that happened in Kemper County. Only in this one, there was no organized resistance by black people to stop the mob attack, and the Supreme Court did not come to the rescue and overturn a conviction. No one came to help these black men. They suffered brutality because of a lie. And the mob was more than willing to carry out this injustice against them because they were black. Being black was the reason this all happened to them. Holly White was born in 1911. The other black man involved in this incident was Pig Lockett. He was born in 1909. Now, Pig was not his birth name, but we don't have any records of what his real name was. This was 1930 in a place where white planters and black workers were all descendants of slave owners and enslaved black people. And just like during slavery times, records of black people's births were not always kept. Holly and Pig attended a segregated school that had one teacher for the entire school. Pig made it to the 5th grade and Holly made it to the 4th. Both men never married, and as far as we know, they had no children. Also, the men had no criminal records and were both known to be good farm laborers. But their reputation for being hardworking and keeping to themselves would not be enough to save them from Jim Crow forces when they came to their door one night in 1930. Like many black people during this time, it didn't matter what your reputation was. It didn't matter how hard working you were. All that mattered was that you were black. That was enough to seize you and execute you without any questions being asked. In late summer of 1930, a young white couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas McCoy, had been recently married. The couple was from Athens, Georgia. After getting married, they took a honeymoon trip to California. On September 6, 1930, they were driving back to Athens and were in Kemper County. Allegedly around 10 p.m., Thomas and his wife were on Highway 45 when they claimed that they saw someone waving a light in the middle of the road for them to stop. Thomas claims that he decided to stop to see what was wrong. The couple said that they saw 3 black men on the side of the road. Allegedly, these 3 black men came to the McCoy's car and robbed them. The black men allegedly took $45 from Thomas, and they also stole Mrs. McCoy's wedding ring. The couple said that one of the black men threatened to take Thomas McCoy's life and throw him into a ditch, but they said they would keep Mrs. McCoy alive so they could violate her later on. Allegations like these were common anytime a black person was lynched. A black man who was accused of violating white womanhood was always seen as deserving of an immediate death sentence. After the alleged robbery, the keys to the car were thrown away to prevent the McCoys from driving to get help. They said that after the robbery occurred, they were able to stop another passing driver who gave them a ride to Wahala, where they reported what happened. Once in Wahala, they told all who would listen how they had just been the victims of a robbery. After reporting that it was black men who attacked this young white couple and threatened to violate the young bride, there was anger and excitement to get these black men. The town wanted to catch these black men fast, and they wanted all who could to help them do it. They called to the sheriff in DeKalb County, and they called officials in the city of Scuba for help. They also called to Meridian to have them bring out the bloodhounds so they could start tracking to find these black men. They wanted as much help as they could to find these black men so they could deal with them immediately. Pig Lockett and Holly White were 2 young black men from the area. It's believed that they had nothing to do with this alleged robbery. That night, these 2 black men had gone to a church revival meeting in Scuba, which is the next town over from Wahala. Pig and Holly had attended every night of the revival and were seen there by many people. After attending the revival, they arrived home around 9:30 p.m. As they settled in for the night, they had no idea that all around them was a massive search for black men. As Pig and Holly were enjoying the rest of their evening, the bloodhounds were taken to the scene of this alleged robbery. At the scene, the bloodhounds picked up a scent. Everyone assumed that it had to be from the robbers. The mob followed the bloodhounds to the area where Pig and Holly's cabin was. The route that Pig and Holly took home from the church went by the scene of this alleged robbery. It was a road that everyone took. The mob never considered this. All they considered was they were led to the home of black men, and that was all they needed to hear to move forward with their plan. Once at Pig and Holly's home, the mob of white men came in and arrested the 2 black men. They were shocked and had no idea what the white men were talking about when they said they were wanted for a robbery. They had an alibi that could be verified, but none of that mattered. They were beaten in the cabin, and some of the mob members wanted to lynch them right there on the spot. But other mob members were able to convince the ones ready for a lynching to allow the law enforcement officers present to take them to the county jail. Before leaving the 2 black men's home, the mob searched to find the money and the ring that was allegedly stolen. They found nothing. Even though they found nothing, they still didn't pause 1 second to think whether they had the right men. After being arrested, Pig and Holly were taken to the DeKalb County Jail. They remained there for several days. I can only imagine how terrified and how scared they must have been. They were at a church revival, and the next thing they knew, they were almost being lynched in their home for something that they did not do. And every day that they stayed in jail, they risked being lynched. It was common for mobs to take black people from the jail and lynch them before a trial could even be had. And Holly and Pig had every right to be fearful. After they were taken to the DeKalb County Jail, the desire for revenge and to lynch these 2 black men did not go away. Instead, the planning began as to how whites would carry out lynch mob justice on them. It did not matter that there was no evidence to suggest that Pig and Holly were guilty of any crime. The alleged victims never identified them as their attackers. The money and the ring that was allegedly stolen was not found at their home. All they had was an allegation that something was done by black men, and that was enough for the mob. It didn't matter that they might have captured the wrong black man. One of the mob members, who was a local planter, was also active in his local church, and he knew that the lynching was being planned. He wanted to make sure that the lynching was done morally. So what he did was he went to Scuba and bought 2 coffins ahead of the lynchings because, in his mind, he thought it would be sacrilegious not to give Pig and Holly a decent burial after they were lynched. He bought them from the mayor of Scuba, who was also the local undertaker. Everyone was involved and knew what was about to happen, and no one did anything to stop it. The day before the mob planned to seize Pig and Holly, 2 of the mob leaders were in Scuba, and they spoke to 2 law enforcement officers, Marshal Guy Bird and Constable J.J. Dotson. and they found out when the two black men's court hearing was and the route that the two officers would take when they drove them to court. After learning this information, they went back and reported it to the other mob members, and they formalized their plan for the lynching. Everyone was in on what was about to happen, from the mayor to the white church members to citizens from multiple towns and law enforcement. On the morning of September 10, 1930, the plan was to take them to court for a preliminary hearing. At around 9 a.m., Marshal Guy Bird and Constable J.J. Dodson put Pig and Holly into the police car and headed to court. The drive was uneventful. That was until they got to about 6 miles out. As they drove through a patch of woods, a mob of masked men came out of nowhere and stopped the car. There were around 30 to 50 members in this mob. They told the two law enforcement officers that they came for one purpose in mind. They wanted Pig and Holly. The mob told the two officers their plans and said that they would not be harmed as long as they did not try to stop them. And that's what happened. Neither officer drew their weapon or put up any resistance. The mob took the two officers out of the car and tied their backs together to a tree. The mob made sure that the officers were able to see the brutality that was about to take place. The mob had a clear plan, and that was to lynch Pig and to lynch Holly. These two black men must have been terrified. Remember, this was a time when no one protected black people. When these two black men saw the mob, they had to have known that this was the end of the line for them. The only question left was whether it would be quick or long and painful. Unfortunately for them, it was the latter. Before lynching the two men, the mob wanted them to confess to the robbery. They did something that I have not read about before, but it must have been common in their area because they seemed clear in how they wanted to carry this out. The lynchers pulled a small, thin tree to the ground. They tied a short rope over the bent tree and tied the other end of the rope to Holly and Pig's necks. Men held the treetop down to the ground. They demanded that each man confess to the robbery and the threat to violate the white woman. And when they wouldn't, the mob would release the treetop to the point where Pig and Holly were pulled into the air by their necks before they went down again and were asked to confess once more. This went on several times, and each time, the two black men refused to confess. It's not clear which one died first, but after doing this torture method several times, one of the black men was successfully strangled and died. After seeing this, the other black man was so fearful that he did what many black people have done in that position. He gave the false confession that the mob wanted to hear. He was quickly hanged after that. Pig and Holly's lives ended right there for something that they did not do. Apparently, while the mob lynching was going on, two white salesmen who were traveling from Meridian happened to be passing by and saw what was going on. They recognized several of the mob members and made the mistake of suggesting that maybe the black men were innocent, and even if they were guilty, that the courts would take care of it. This was a mistake. These two white men were told to move along and warned that if they stayed, they would be strung up with Pig and Holly. They quickly left and went to scuba and reported what they saw. Now, some of you may be thinking, what about the third black man? The alleged victim said that 3 black men robbed them, but only Pig and Holly were arrested and lynched. There should have been a good reason to conclude that perhaps Pig and Holly were not the real culprits. Well, none of that mattered to the mob. Inconsistencies were not a reason to call off the lynching of a black person. The only detailed investigation and account of this horrific ordeal that is known to exist reports that whites and Waholics said that after Pig and Holly were taken to jail, they found the third black person and disposed of him. That likely means that they found another innocent black man who had nothing to do with this and lynched him. After Pig and Holly were lynched, everyone moved on like nothing happened. The papers barely covered the lynching. The district attorney and the police conducted no investigation to try to identify and prosecute the mob members for overtaking law enforcement and tying them up and then lynching their prisoners. Local white churches and organizations did not talk about what happened. It was as if what happened to Pig and Holly was not even worth the breath to speak about, nor the paper to write about what happened. The fact that Pig and Holly had an alibi and the mob found no evidence of the crime in their home was proof that they did not commit this crime. But there was something else. There was evidence to suggest that the robbery never happened. It was completely made up by the McCoys. There were whites in Waholic that said that the McCoys concocted this entire story of being robbed by 3 black men as a way to get sympathy and to collect money to continue their honeymoon trip. After they reported the robbery, the McCoys stayed in Waholic until they received enough money that was equal to what they claimed the black men stole from them. They said they were robbed of $45. That's the equivalent to around $800 in today's money. This is really hard stuff to hear, but this is necessary. These were real black people who suffered during a time when no one cared about black people. What happened to them was not a big deal. It was looked at as if it was normal and a regular occurrence. This is what life was like for black people. There was injustice everywhere. You were born into injustice and died in injustice. There was no escape from it. You couldn't get around it, couldn't go under it or above it. Injustice was there all the time. And sadly, Holly White and Pig Lockett lost their lives in a brutal way because of injustice. And it's important that we tell their story and what happened to them. I want to know your thoughts on this story. Had you ever heard of Pig Lockett and Holly White, and how did it make you feel learning all that they went through? Leave me a comment down below and let me know your thoughts.